You clicked because your rice cooker sits on the counter doing one job, and you already suspect it can do so much more. You're right. That single cheap machine can replace half the gadgets in your kitchen, cut your cooking bills, and quietly do work you've been paying other appliances to do. This is the Chinese method, the way I learned it in real homes, where one pot had to do everything, because nobody had money for a drawer full of single-use machines. And the best part comes at the end, a trick from an old teahouse habit that turns a $2 bag of leftovers into something people beg you to make again. I need to tell you something before we start. The first time I understood this, I was standing in a narrow kitchen in Guangzhou, watching an old woman lift the lid off a rice cooker and pull out a whole steamed fish that had cooked on top of the rice while the rice cooked underneath. One machine, one button, 2 dishes. I remember the smell of ginger and scallion hitting the steam, and I remember thinking I had wasted years buying things I never needed. If you rent, don't click away. Every single trick here works on a countertop, needs no permission, and leaves no mark behind. So let me start where most people get it wrong, before we ever get to the clever stuff. Most people think a rice cooker is just a hot box with a switch. It isn't. Inside almost every basic rice cooker is a small, brilliant piece of engineering called a magnetic thermostat. And once you understand it, every trick in this video suddenly makes sense. Here is what actually happens when you press that lever down. The metal pot sits on a spring-loaded magnet. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and no matter how much heat you pour in, the water will not go higher than that while there is still water in the pot. So the cooker just sits there at boiling temperature, steady, patient, until the water is gone. The moment the last of the free water is absorbed or evaporated, the temperature of the pot shoots up past boiling, and that heat weakens the magnet, and the magnet lets go, and the lever pops up to warm. That click you hear is not a timer. It is physics. The machine is literally sensing the exact second your rice is done by feeling the temperature jump. That is why a rice cooker never burns properly measured rice. It cannot overcook while water remains. Once you know that, you stop treating it like a mystery box and start treating it like a precise steam engine, which is exactly what the old kitchens did. But here is the thing that changes everything. If the machine holds a perfect boil until the water is gone, then anything you can cook with steady, gentle, boiling heat can be cooked in there, and that is a much longer list than rice. Therefore, the first real trick is the one that saved me the most money, and it has nothing to do with rice at all. Let me talk about eggs, because this is where skeptics get converted. For years, I boiled eggs on the stove, stood over the pot, watched the clock, and still got a gray-green ring around the yolk and shells that tore off half the white. Then I watched a friend's mother in a small apartment kitchen do something that looked lazy. She took 6 eggs, did not even add water to cover them, poured in just half a cup of water, closed the lid, and pressed the button. When it clicked off, she moved them into cold water. The shells slid off like they were greased. The yolks were bright and perfectly set. What happened is that the eggs never boiled in tumbling water at all. They steamed. Steam at boiling temperature cooks the egg gently and evenly, and the sudden cold shock shrinks the egg away from the shell. Half a cup of water. That is maybe a penny of electricity and a machine you already own. No more standing at the stove. And if you want soft, jammy centers, you pull them the second the lever clicks. If you want hard yolks, you leave them on warm for 5 more minutes. I have made 24 eggs this way at once, for a week of lunches, and I have never gone back to a pot. Once eggs worked, I got greedy. And I started wondering what else I had been overcomplicating. Because if steam is the secret, then steaming vegetables is the obvious next step, and this is where renters especially should lean in. You do not need a steamer basket, though a cheap folding one for $3 helps. You put an inch of water in the bottom, set your vegetables in a heat-proof dish or on a little rack, close the lid, and press cook. Broccoli, green beans, whole ears of corn, all of it comes out bright and crisp tender in the time it takes to set the table. The cooker clicks off on its own when the water runs low, so you physically cannot forget it and turn dinner into mush. I have cooked entire dinners in a single dorm-sized cooker on a countertop, in a rented room with no working stove, and nobody ever knew. Therefore, let me answer the question you are already asking. If I can steam vegetables, can I steam a whole meal at once, protein and starch together, the way that woman in Guangzhou did with her fish? Yes, and this is the trick that made me feel like I had been robbed for years. It is called the layered method, and it is the beating heart of the Chinese one-pot kitchen. You start your rice and water as normal. Then you take a metal or heat-proof plate, and you rest it on a small rack or even a ball of crumpled foil above the rice. And on that plate you lay marinated chicken, or fish with ginger and scallion, or spare ribs with black bean and garlic. You close the lid one time. The rice cooks in the water below. The steam rising through the pot cooks the meat above. And here is the part that feels like magic, but is just good design. The savory juices from the meat drip down onto the rice, and by the time the lever clicks up, your rice has absorbed the flavor of the entire dish. One pot, one button, no stove, no oven. In old homes where fuel cost real money and space was tight, this was not a clever trick, it was survival, and it tasted better than the fussy separate pot version because nothing was wasted. I timed it once against cooking the same meal on a stove with 3 pans, and the cooker version took the same amount of active work as pressing one lever, which is to say, almost none. But steaming savory food led me to a discovery that genuinely embarrassed me, because I had spent real money on a machine that did exactly this and nothing else. I am talking about yogurt. I owned a dedicated yogurt maker once, $40, used it twice, gave it away. Then I learned that a rice cooker with a warm setting is a nearly perfect yogurt incubator. And traditional kitchens across Asia use the residual warmth of cooling pots to culture milk long before any of these gadgets existed. Yogurt bacteria are happiest at around 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Too hot and you kill them. Too cold and they sleep. The warm setting on many cookers, especially with the lid propped or cycled on and off, hovers right in that gentle zone. Here is what I do. I heat a quart of milk until it just steams. Let it cool until it is warm to the touch but not hot. Then stir in 2 big spoonfuls of plain yogurt that still has live cultures. I pour it into the cooker pot, wrap the whole thing in a towel, and let the residual warmth hold it overnight. By morning, I have a full quart of thick, tangy yogurt for the price of a carton of milk, which is a fraction of what the little store cups cost. The first time it set, I stood there poking it with a spoon, honestly not believing it had worked. That is the moment I want you to have. Now, therefore, if a rice cooker can hold a low, steady, gentle warmth for yogurt, your mind should jump to the next question, and mine did. What else needs a low, steady warmth and long, patient time? The answer is one of the greatest comfort foods in the entire Chinese kitchen, and it is the cheapest thing you will ever make. Congee, rice porridge. You take 1 part rice to about 8 or 9 parts water, a much wetter ratio than normal rice, and you let the cooker work. On a basic cooker, you may need to catch it and restart it, but on any cooker with a porridge setting, it runs itself. What comes out hours or even a single long cycle later is silky, soothing rice soup that stretches a 1/4 cup of rice into a full bowl of food. In old households, congee was the medicine, the breakfast, the food for the sick and the old and the very young. A handful of rice and a pot of water could feed someone through illness when there was nothing else. You can drop an egg into it at the end, or leftover shredded chicken, or a little ginger, and each addition costs almost nothing. I have fed myself a warm, filling breakfast for weeks on the cost of a single bag of rice, and every bowl felt like something a grandmother made. That is the power hiding in the machine on your counter. Now I have to stop and talk to you directly if you rent your home, because this next part was built for you, and I do not want you thinking any of this needs a landlord's blessing. Everything I have told you so far runs on one plug in one outlet and leaves no trace. But renters have a specific pain I know well, because I lived it. You get one weak stove, or a stove you are afraid to use, or a kitchen so small you cannot own more than a couple of appliances. So here is the whole toolkit that turns a single rice cooker into your entire kitchen, no permission required, nothing screwed to a wall, nothing that can lose you a deposit. You can boil pasta in it, add water, salt, the pasta, press cook, stir once or twice so it does not clump, and drain when it is tender. You can make a full pot of soup by sweating aromatics on the cook setting, adding broth and vegetables, and letting it come up to heat. You can cook dried beans by soaking them overnight and then running them with fresh water through a cook cycle or 2 until they are soft, which turns a bag of dried beans costing $1 or $2 into pots and pots of protein. You can even bake in it, and I will come back to that, because it sounds impossible, and it is one of my favorites. The point is this: if your kitchen is small, or borrowed, or barely legal, one rice cooker on a shelf gives you back the ability to cook real food. I have lived through that exact situation, and this machine was the thing that made a rented room feel like a home. If you want to go deeper into this kind of thinking, the hidden engineering behind everyday objects, and how ordinary kitchens have always worked smarter than the gadget aisle, I put a lot of it into my book, House Fixes, along with the deeper principles behind fixes like this one. You can find it linked in the description below. It is the kind of book that changes how you look at the tools already sitting around you. With that in mind, let's get back to what this machine can actually do once you stop treating it like a mystery box and start treating it like a precise steam engine, which is exactly what the old kitchens did. But cooking in it constantly raised a problem that nobody warned me about, and this is where I nearly gave up on the whole idea. My cooker started smelling. The bottom got a crusty white film, the pot stained, and the lid held onto the ghost of last night's fish. I almost bought a new one. Then I remembered the two things every traditional kitchen kept within arm's reach, and neither of them was a special cleaner: vinegar and baking soda. That white, crusty film is limescale, hard mineral left behind by your water, and mineral scale surrenders to acid. I pour in about a cup of water and a cup of plain white vinegar, run a short cook cycle, let it sit, and the scale wipes away with a cloth. A jug of white vinegar costs a couple of dollars and lasts months. For the smells and the stains, baking soda. I make a loose paste with a little water and gently rub the inside of the pot and the lid, and the sponge lifts away odors and light staining without scratching. If a smell is really stubborn, I run a cycle with water and a few slices of lemon, and the steam carries the fresh scent into every corner the cloth cannot reach. None of this costs more than pocket change, and all of it was standard practice long before anyone bottled a product with a picture of a rice cooker on the label. Your grandmother's pantry cleaned better than the cleaning aisle, and it did it for cents. Now that the machine was clean, therefore I got bold, and I want to hand you the trick that makes people at a table go quiet. You can bake a cake in a rice cooker. I did not believe it either. But think about what a cake needs. It needs steady, moderate, all-around heat and moisture, and a sealed rice cooker with its metal pot is basically a gentle, humid oven. You mix a simple batter. Sponge cake works beautifully. You grease the pot, you pour it in, and you press cook. On many machines, the cooker will click off before the cake is done, because the batter is not water and the temperature climbs. So you simply wait a few minutes and press it again, and you repeat until a skewer comes out clean. What you get is a cake with a tender, steam-soft crumb and a lightly golden bottom, and it costs you the price of flour, sugar, and eggs. No oven. In tiny apartments and in homes that never owned an oven at all, this is how celebration cakes were made. And this is why so many classic Asian sponge cakes are soft and moist, rather than dry and crumbly. They were born in steam, not in dry heat. The first time I flipped one out onto a plate, and it held its shape, light and springy, I laughed out loud in an empty kitchen. That is a $5 dessert that looks like you fussed for hours. But every one of these tricks, the eggs, the layered meals, the yogurt, the congee, the cake, kept leading me back to one uncomfortable question, and this is the villain of the whole story. Why did I have to learn all of this by accident, in someone else's kitchen, from an old woman who assumed everyone already knew? Why did I spend years buying an egg cooker, a yogurt maker, a food steamer, a slow cooker, when the machine I already owned could do every single one of those jobs? And the answer is uncomfortable, but simple. Nobody could sell me the knowledge. There is no profit in telling you that the appliance already on your counter replaces the four you were about to buy. Every single-use gadget in that store aisle exists because a separate machine can be boxed, priced, and sold to you. A technique cannot be boxed. The layered steaming method that feeds a whole family from one pot has no company behind it, no advertising budget, no shelf space, because there is no product to move. So the knowledge did what buried knowledge always does. It survived quietly, in home kitchens, passed from one pair of hands to the next, in families who kept doing it because it worked, and it was cheap, while the rest of us were sold a drawer full of plastic. This was never a secret because it was rare. It was a secret because it was free. And that brings me to the one I promised you at the very beginning. The finale. The trick that came out of an old tea house habit and turns cheap scraps into something people ask you to make again and again. I am talking about tea eggs, and specifically the marbled tea egg method that I learned traces back to roadside tea stalls and tea houses where nothing could be wasted and everything had to be worth the few coins it cost. This is the payoff, and it costs almost nothing, and you can start it tonight and eat it tomorrow. Here is the story of it. Tea stalls always had two things going in abundance: cheap eggs and used tea leaves, the leaves already steeped once for customers and normally thrown away. Somebody, generations ago, refused to throw those spent leaves out. They boiled eggs, and instead of tossing the leaves, and instead of tossing anything, they cracked the cooked eggshells all over without removing them, and dropped the eggs into a simmering bath of that used tea, soy sauce, star anise, and a little cinnamon and orange peel. Then they let the eggs sit in that dark, fragrant liquid, sometimes overnight. The cracks in the shell let the flavored liquid seep in along every fracture line. When you finally peel the egg, the white is covered in a spiderweb of brown marbling, like fine cracked porcelain, tinted and perfumed all the way through. The tea tannins firm up the surface of the egg and cut any sulfur smell. The soy salts it, the spices make it smell like a holiday, and the whole thing is built on ingredients that were about to be garbage. Use tea leaves, eggs, a splash of soy sauce, pennies. And you can do the entire thing in your rice cooker, which is what makes it perfect for the finale. You hard cook your eggs in the cooker with the half cup of water steam method I gave you at the start, so the whole video comes full circle. Then you gently tap each egg all over on the counter until the shell is a mosaic of cracks, but you leave the shell on. You put them back in the pot with enough water to cover, a good pour of soy sauce, a spoon of your used or fresh tea leaves, or 2 tea bags, a star anise or 2, a small piece of cinnamon, and a strip of dried orange peel if you have it. You bring it up to heat on the cook setting, then let it drop to warm, and you let those eggs bathe for hours, or overnight if you can wait. The next day, you lift out an egg, peel away the cracked shell, and there it is, the marbled web, the deep savory smell, a snack that costs almost nothing and looks like it came from a specialty shop. I brought a bowl of these to a gathering once, and grown adults crowded around asking where I bought them, and when I said I made them from spent tea leaves and cheap eggs in my rice cooker, nobody believed me. That is the moment this whole tradition was built to give you, the moment where garbage becomes a delicacy and the machine on your counter did the work. This is a fix that was almost forgotten. It lived on roadside stalls and in home kitchens because it could never be sold to you in a box, because its whole genius is that it uses the thing you were about to throw away. It got pushed aside by convenience and by products with advertising budgets, and it survived only because a few people kept cracking those shells and steeping those eggs and handing the method down. Now you are holding it. Now it is yours to keep alive. So here is what I really want you to feel. You did not just learn some kitchen hacks today. You took back a whole kitchen's worth of jobs from the machines that were sold to you one at a time, and you got it from the quiet, patient, hand-me-down knowledge of homes that never had money to waste. You are the kind of person who refuses to keep overpaying for a problem that a few dollars and a little know-how can solve. And that instinct is exactly right, and it is exactly what these old kitchens ran on. Now tell me one thing in the comments, because I read them and I want to know. Which one are you trying first? The layered one-pot meal where the meat juices drip into the rice, or the marbled tea eggs from spent leaves? Tell me which. And if you have a rice cooker trick your own family passed down, leave it, because that is how this knowledge stays alive, one comment at a time. And if you want more of these buried, cheap, honest fixes that nobody can put in a bottle and sell you, come with me, because the next one I am sharing is a 2-ingredient trick for keeping rice fresh and unspoiled for days without the fridge. The exact method old grain stores used before anyone owned a refrigerator, and once you see it, you will never store rice the same way again. Let me leave you with this, because I do not want you to walk away thinking today was only about food. The real thing you just recovered is the idea that the answer was already sitting on your counter the whole time, and somebody profited from you not knowing it. Every egg you steam, Every meal you layer, every quart of yogurt you set, every cake you lift out springy and warm is a small refusal to be sold the same job 4 times. That single machine, one lever, one plug, is a whole kitchen if you know how to speak to it, and now you do. Think back to that magnetic switch I told you about at the start. The one that clicks up not on a timer but because it can feel the exact moment your food is done. That little piece of physics is the reason none of this is risky. The machine cannot run away from you. It cannot burn a pot of properly measured rice. It cannot overcook your steamed fish while there is still water making steam. It cannot let your eggs turn to rubber if you pull them when it clicks. Every trick I gave you leans on that one honest mechanism, which means you can try all of them tonight without fear, in an apartment, in a dorm, in a rented room, with nothing on the line but a few cents of ingredients. And that is the part the gadget aisle never wanted in plain sight, that the humble machine most people use for exactly one thing was quietly engineered to do a dozen. The families who kept these methods alive were not chefs and were not experts. They were people who could not afford to waste a single coin or a single scrap, and out of that came a way of cooking that is cheaper, simpler, and often better than the expensive way. That is the inheritance. That is what got handed to me in a narrow kitchen full of ginger steam, and that is what I just handed to you. So go crack a few eggs, prop your cooker lid, wrap a towel around a pot of warm milk, and find out for yourself. Test the smallest one first, the steamed eggs with half a cup of water, and watch that shell slide off clean, and let that be the moment you stop believing you need a drawer full of machines. Then work your way up to the layered meal and the marbled tea eggs, and by the end of the weekend you will look at that plain little cooker on your counter and see what those old kitchens always saw. Not a rice machine. A whole kitchen, patient and cheap and honest, just waiting for someone who finally knows how to use it. Now, this video gave you the overview. But inside the Old Home Wisdom, I pick up right where we just stopped and walk you through every trick, step by step. You can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, no bot. And you won't be doing this alone. You'll belong with thousands of thrifty homeowners already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. And you can cancel anytime. If any of these tricks made things a little easier for you, do stay with me. Subscribe and have a look around the channel, where I share plenty more simple ideas to help in your kitchen.